Hi there, I'm Wendy and welcome to my channel where I share knitting and crochet tutorial videos for my projects and techniques. And in today's video, I'm going to introduce you to the magic loop form of knitting using a circular needle for making socks. To demonstrate to you today, I'm using a 2.5mm circular needle, and this one is 80 centimeters in length, and that's my preferred length for using the magic loop method when I'm knitting socks. This one is a Knit Pro Smart Sticks. I'm not sponsored by them, but it's just the one that I'm actually using today, and I'm going to demonstrate using a plain coloured sock 4-ply yarn. So the yarn that I'm using today is West Yorkshire Spinners Signature 4-ply. Another little helpful thing to do when you're using this technique is to have a padlock style stitch marker or a removable type stitch marker to just hold the edges of your work together when you first connect your round. If you haven't got that, don't worry, you can always use something like a hair grip or a safety pin, or you can even just tie in a little piece of yarn in a separate colour just to hold the two ends together. But I'm going to show you that any moment now. Just before we start, if you're new to my channel, please take a moment to subscribe and click that notification bell so that you get to hear when my next videos go live. And it would also be lovely if you enjoy the video if you gave me a thumbs up on the like button as well. When I'm using the magic loop method, I normally cast on and then I work one row straight, just like you would do on a straight pair of needles before I connect it up into the round. But when you're new to this method, I think it makes it easier for you if you work 2 rows on the straight, because it gives you this ribbon type tape effect and you're less likely to twist your work as you connect if you've got this little band that you can keep straight. So to make a start here, I've cast on 60 stitches just because that's an average amount of stitches for a lady's medium-sized 4-ply yarn sock, and I've worked 2 rows of a knit 1 purl 1 rib. So the first thing that I want to do now is to pull all my stitches so that they're sitting in the centre section of the cable. So now they're sitting in the centre, I want to divide them in half and I'm going to pull a loop through the centre of it with the cable. So I'm just going to count half of my stitches and then pull the loop through. So that's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 30. So I'm just going to take the cable between those 2 stitches and pull a loop through, and that's dividing my stitches now onto 2 sides of that circular needle. Now I'm going to bring all my stitches back up onto the needle tips, but I've got 30 stitches on one needle and 30 stitches on the other. So I'm just going to ease them all up. And this is where, when you're new to using the magic loop method, that having 2 rows knitted in the straight just makes it a little bit easier for you to check that you've not twisted your stitches, because we want to make sure that we haven't got a twist here. We want to make sure that our stitches haven't turned over the needle, because if that happens, we're not going to be able to rectify it. So we want to make sure that our work is all sitting underneath our needles, and that we don't have a twist at this joint here at the back, and that we've got our cast on edge sitting nicely along the bottom. Now we also want to make sure at this point that our yarn that's going from the stitch on our needle to our ball of yarn is on the back needle. Now if by some chance you've got that thread on the front needle, I'm just going to quickly show you now just how to change that around to the back needle. So if you're looking at this and thinking, oh no, my yarn is actually on the front needle, this is far easier to rectify than you think. All you need to do is push both the bottom edges into the centre and up and over the other side. So you're turning the whole thing upside down, and then just turn your needles over and you will see that you now have your working yarn on the needle, which is the back needle, and the front needle is yarn free, and we're ready to go and ready to connect up. So just before we connect our work into the round, let's just take one final look, and we're just going to check that we haven't got any twists at this point here at the crossover between the back needle and the front needle. And then we're going to give ourselves a little helping hand by attaching that stitch marker or piece of thread and just connecting the two edges together. Because if we do that now, that will hold our work together and it will make it a lot easier for us to work the first initial 1 or 2 rounds. And we're now connected and our work can't twist anymore. So now we're ready to start, and I've got both my needle tips pointing to the right hand side, and I'm going to take the back needle tip and I'm going to pull that out. So that's now free for me to use as my working needle. I'm going to make sure that all my stitches are pushed up to the front of my needle, ready to be knitted off. And then I want to take my yarn and I'm just going to throw it out the way. I'm going to throw it behind the cable so that I can make my first knit stitch. So I'm just going to pop my needle in the first stitch and make 1 knit stitch. And then I pull it slightly tight, not too tight, but I'm just holding it slightly firmly, and then I can make my purl. And I'm going to continue working my rib till I get to the end of this 30 stitches, and then I'm going to meet you back here and show you how to turn your work so that you're working the other half of the stitches in the round. And I've now just finished the first half of my round and I'm ready to knit the next half of the round. So I'm going to turn my needles around so that they're back facing in the right direction. And then I'm going to pull the stitches on the front cable back up to the needle tips. And then with the back needle, I'm going to pull the back needle out so that I've got the back needle free, and that's my working needle again. So I want to make sure that I've got my yarn out of the way. So I'm going to pick my yarn up and throw it behind the cable so it's out of the way for the knit stitch. And then I'm going to take my working needle and start to knit on the other side. And so I'm going to knit to the end of the round, working my 1 by 1 rib, and then I'll meet you when I get to the end of these stitches and go over again how you turn your work around and start knitting on the other side of your cable needle. Okay, so I finished knitting across these stitches and I've now got my long cable at the back pointing out to the left hand side, and my front needle is pointing to the left, and these stitches are right up to the needle tip. So again, I'm going to turn my work around so that my needle tips are facing to the right, and then I'm going to pull the front needle back. And I'm going to bring the stitches on the front needle back up to the needle tip so that they're ready to be knitted. And then I'm going to pull the back needle out so that becomes my working needle ready to start knitting the next round. So again, I'm going to take my working yarn and I'm going to lift it over the cable and to the back so that it's out of the way, and then I can start to knit the next half of my round. So I'm starting with my knit stitch, and I'm going to continue with my knit 1, purl 1 rib until I get to the end of this round, and I will meet you when I get to the end of this 30 stitches and go through once more how to change your needles around so that you're ready to work the stitches of the back half of your cable. So I've now knitted all the stitches on this needle, and my needles are now pointing out to the left hand side. So I'm going to turn my work around once more so that my needle tips are pointing to the right, and I'm going to pull my front needle back and pull the back needle out. So it's almost like a shunting movement now that you're making. And when you get to the end of knitting all the stitches off your needle, you will always now be turning your needles around so that they're pointing to the right, and you will always be pulling the cable back on the front stitches, so the front stitches are up by the needle tip like this, and the back needle then always comes out so that that's free to be your working needle. And then again, we're going to take the yarn and we're going to take it over the back needle and out the way so that we're ready to make a knit stitch. And I'm going to work one more round, and then when I get to the end of this round, I'm just going to show you where to place your yarn if a purl stitch is the first stitch that's on your needles. So I'll meet you when I've knitted all the stitches on this needle one more time. Okay, so once again, I've knitted all the stitches on my needle, and both my needles are pointing out to the left-hand side. So to turn my work ready to work the other side of my round, I simply flip my work over so the needles are pointing in the right direction, and then I'm going to pull that cable needle back at the front. So I'm pulling the stitches back up onto the needle tips at the front of my work. And then I'm going to be pulling the back needle out so that I've got that back needle free, ready to knit. So this is the way that we continue when we're working the magic loop method. Now, the only other thing that you need to know is that when you're working a knit stitch, you always want the yarn over the needle and behind, out of the way. And if you're working a purl stitch, you want the yarn just hanging down in front of the needle, so that if you were going to make a purl, your working yarn is just hanging down. And I'm just going to pop my needle in as if to purl, and then your yarn is naturally in the right place. If you're making that knit stitch, you need to make sure that your working yarn is up and behind the cable. Otherwise, you can create an extra stitch. So that's the only thing that you need to double check on when you're making the first stitch of your row. But this is the method that you'll continue making for magic loop knitting. So I hope you found this video useful and that you enjoy magic loop knitting as much as I do, because this is the way that I always knit my socks. I prefer this far more than knitting on 4 or 3 double pointed needles. So thanks for joining me. Don't forget to hit that like button if you found this video useful, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye.